Hi there, welcome to the second discussion of The Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope. We finished the first video on, I think, the end of the first canto, so we find some mock epic elements like the invocation of Muse in the opening lines. Beginning part of the poem also deals with a proposition of the whole work. The element of war here we find dispute between two families because of Mr. Petry's act of stealing a lock of a fashionable lady named Belinda. Satire is one of the most important characteristics of the mock heroic epic actually. Here Pope fiercely satirizes at the young generation contemporary age through the character. Mock heroic epic deals with almost all characteristics of an epic poem, like grand style, use of poetic diction, epic simile, description of nature, except grand subjects. During the 18th century, poets in general and epic poets in particular formed their language very largely. And we move to Canto 2. In the second canto, Pope highly praises the beauty of Belinda. Pope writes that the way the sun rises with all its splendor in the sky and throw its crimson radiance over the ocean, in the same way Belinda competes in brightness with the sun. Like sun, she comes out of her house with great splendor and gets into a boat and sails upon the surface of the silver bright water of the river Thames. In this canto, Pope describes two beautiful locks of hair of Belinda. They hang gracefully in equal curves. They wreck the peace of mind of men. It seems that these locks, with their bright ringlets, have an agreement with each other to embellish Belinda's smooth and ivory white neck. Men who look at her would have been captured by and kept as prisoners in the maze of her hair. This nymph to the destruction of mankind nourished two locks, which graceful hung behind, in equal curves and will conspire to deck, with shining ringlets, the smooth ivory neck. Love in these labyrinths his slaves detained, and mighty hearts are held in slender chains. According to Pope, we can catch birds with traps and fish with fishing lines, in which horse hair is used. Similarly, men are caught in the trap of women's fair curls. A beautiful woman can attract a man with a single hair, Pope writes, and beauty draws us with a single hair. Now Pope introduces that character who is directly responsible for the ruin of Belinda's look of hair and for her wrath, the adventurous Baron, that is Lord Petry. Lord Petry admires Belinda's bright locks. He longs for them. He is filled with an ambition to possess that treasure. To carry out his purpose, he thinks of some device that he can employ. For when success, a lover's toil attends, few ask if fraud or force attain his ends. In order to attain his object, the Baron prays before sunrise to heaven to grant him success. He prays to heaven every heavenly power, but chiefly to love. He praises and raises an altar to love. This altar is made of 12 huge French. This altar is made of 12 huge French romance books. He also places there 3 garters, half a pair of gloves, and all other tokens of his conquest in previous love affairs. Okay? So Belinda is smiling, and the whole world looks happy. They all are in merry mood except Ariel, who invisibly accompanies Belinda, and as we have discussed the last lecture, that Ariel is the supernatural spirit that is meant to protect Belinda in her life. To take all necessary precautions, he summons his fellow spirits. Ariel is perched or balanced on the mast of the boat, while his fellow spirits form a circle around him. So Ariel then addresses to his fellow spirits. He tells them the reason for why they have been summoned. He reminds them that now it's their duty to look after the welfare of beautiful ladies. So they agreed to save the powder from the cheeks, save the bottled perfumes from evaporating, call the ladies to blush more effectively, and all these precautions in order that the Bad news that they are told in the morning shall never happen. Then Uriel assigns various duties to various selves. To 50 selected selves, he entrusts the important responsibility of protecting Belinda Petticoat. The act of Belinda's decorating herself with the beauty aid like puffs, powders, patches, pupils are the subject of the satire of the poem, because it shows the chief preoccupation of the ladies, their appearance or look, by which they attract the young boys or the young gallants. In Canto 3, the boat carries Belinda and her party to Hampton Court, a palace where the great Queen Anne sometimes held political consultations with her advisors and sometimes attended tea parties. They talk about the subjects like who gave the dance party, who paid the last visit to the court. It's now afternoon. It's the time when the hungry judges are in hurry to sign their judgments, when the member of jury hurriedly give their verdict of guilty against the accused, when the traders return from the exchange to find some peace, and when ladies complete their long labor of dress in themselves to get ready for dinner. At this hour, Belinda is urged by a desire to become famous. Meet two adventurous knights in a contest at Umber. The three contestants immediately got ready for the battle. O thoughtless mortals, ever blind to fate, too soon dejected and too soon elate. Sudden these honors shall be snatched away. الهونر الفخر اللي انتوا حاسينه عبارة عن نزاعات تافهة ومجرد مجموعة من مساحيق التجميل shall be snatched away، هيتنزع دلوقتي منكم. and cursed forever this victorious day، وهيفضل اليوم ده cursed للأبد. Poor Belinda doesn't know that her victory will soon be converted into a day of disgrace for her. فبدأوا بقى السلفس حواليها يجتمعوا. Some of them fan the steaming coffee, some spread their wings carefully. وبعدين بيبدأ بوب يقول but when to mischief mortals bend their will, how soon they find fit in instruments of ill, that at that time a lady called Clarissa take out from her shining case a pair of scissors. بدأت بقى شخصية اسمها كلاريسا تطلع مقص من شطتها. Pop writes just then Clarissa drew with tempting grace a two-edged weapon، ده طبعا symbol ليه scissors، from her shining case. So ladies in romance assist their knight, present the spear and arm him for the fight. So the baron is tempted to make use of this weapon. He takes the scissors and spread them just behind her neck اللي هي Belinda's neck يعني, in order to cut off one of the two locks. At this, 1,000 selves immediately come to protect Belinda's hair. Just at that moment, Uriel discovers that there is a human lover hidden in Belinda's heart. He realizes that he can no longer protect her, as spirits can protect only maidens who are pure and not room in their hearts for earthly lovers. Then flashed the living lightning from her eyes. أول بقى ما اللورد اقتلع اللق من مكانها من شعرها. دي الباسج اللي بتوصف حالة screaming of horrors اللي بليندا أنتجتها. Then flashed the living lightning from her eyes, and screams of horror rend the affrighted skies. Not louder strikes to pitying heaven are cast, when husbands or when lapdogs breathe their last, or when rich china vessels fallen from high in glittering dust and painted fragments lie. Pop says that when a woman loses her husband or her lapdog, she doesn't utter such loud cries to seek pity or sympathy of gods as Belinda uttered on this occasion. The victorious baron feels jubilant on having possession of the glorious prize اللي هو Belinda locks of hair. He says that his name, glory, and his fame will live as long as the fish swim joyfully in streams. Thus, Canto 3 begins in the mock heroic manner. On the one hand, Bob gives the description of Hampton Court, then mingling of the great and then low of the great Queen Anne, sometimes taking counsel and sometimes tea, close by those meads forever crowned with flowers, where Thames with pride survey his rising towers. There stands a structure of majestic frame, which from the neighboring Hampton takes its name. Her Britain's statement often fall for them, for doom, or foreign tyrants, and of nymphs at home. Hear thou great Anna, whom 3 realms obey, does sometimes counsel take and sometimes tea. فبيشرح هنا الكونسل وبيشرح المكان وبيصف بالظبط ايه المكان اللي كان بيحصل فيه. The lines or descriptions of the card game is masterly. The lines in which Pope speaks about the hungry judges, the jurymen, the merchants returning from the exchange are part of the satire on 18th century life. Pope's age is also famous for the coffee house culture. Description of coffee making and coffee drinking is also part of his satire. The manner in which the Baron clipped the lock from Belinda's head is very amusing. Through Belinda's wrath and her screams of horror are examples of comic bathos where we find the person lamenting for the trivial thing and remains completely unconcerned for the tragedy itself. We find obscenity in the Baron's declaration that the winning of the lock of Belinda's hair will bring him immortality. So in Canto 4, in the beginning of the Canto 4 or the 4th Canto, Pope has described the rage, resentment, and despair of Belinda. He says that the youthful kings who are captured alive in battle, scornful old maids who have lost their charms, passionate lovers who have been deprived of the pleasures of love, aged ladies. Belinda does over the rape of her hair, Pope writes, and secret passions labored in her breast. بيتكلم على الحب اللي الارثلي for the earthly man اللي هو mainly Lord Beatry himself. By the word secret passions, Pope says that Belinda loves the Baron secretly, and yet she feels annoyed with him because of his act of stealing the lock of her hair, which has brought indignity. Now Pope introduced a new Gamni اللي هو Umbriel. Umbriel is the name of the spirit of the earth. He is a coarse and crude spirit. Goddess of the timber is the personification of ill temper, gloom, discontent, and disgruntlement. Goddess of spleen is the presiding deity from whom all the Gamnis or earth spirit draw their strength. He flees at great speed and reaches at the dark tomb-like dwelling place of the goddess of spleen, and spleen is an imaginary being like a tiny man. Here in the cave, the goddess reclined on her bed, sighing thoughtfully. بعد كده بنشوف إن Umbriel tells the goddess that he makes ladies lose color at the thought of losing a game of cards. So the goddess gives him the function or a job to Umbriel, gives him a bag which contains mainly the anger and the fury of women. The bottle contains their fears, sorrows, grief, sighs, sobs, screams, curses, loud screams, and disputes, angry words, all of this. Umbriel is very happy having received these gifts from spleen. He flees to the earth and tears the swollen bag directly over the head of Belinda and Salistras. Salistras also feels infuriated and begins to utter angry and violent words which add fuel to the fire raging in Belinda's heart. The loud words of Salistras are echoed by the walls of Hampton Palace. Here Pope satirizes at the loud and unladylike shouts which aristocratic ladies can utter, and their loss of self-control when their pride or vanity have been hurt. Salistras in an angry voice describes the enormous labor that Belinda had spent in looking after her. She says, "O wretched maid," she spread her hands and cried, while Hampton's echoes, "Wretched maid," replied, "Was it for this you took so constant care, the pumpkin, comb, and essence to prepare?" Salistras says that she can already visualize Belinda shedding a tear in her distress. She imagines the horrible things people say about Belinda. She thinks about their would-be gossip in which Belinda's health and beauty would be degraded. As if it were not enough, Umbriel, the hateful earth spirit, is not satisfied with what he has achieved. He breaks the bottle from which many sorrows issued forth. فهيجي أكتر some sights of sorrows. فبليندا repents for the day. بتبدأ بقى انها تلوم نفسها وبتتوب عن هذا اليوم what moved my head with youthful lords to room. Oh, had I stated and said my prayers at home, it was this the morning omen seemed to tell. Thrice from my trembling hand the patched box fell, the tottering china shook without wind. A self too warned me of the threats of fate, in mystic visions now believed too late. Thus Belinda repents for those foolish ideas that urged her mind to roam about in the company of young lords. She wishes she had stayed at home and led a religious kind of life. Belinda says that it's painful to see the pitiful reminder of her hair which has been treated so scornfully by the Baron. Oh, hadst thou, Crow, been content to seize hairs less in sight or any hairs but these. وبتبدأ برضو ملامح السورو والأنجر إنها تستمر معاها طول الكانتو. Thus she asked why the Baron couldn't feel satisfied by cutting off some hair from another part of my head so that her loss hadn't been so prominent, why he couldn't spare that lock of hair and cut off some other bunch. Here Pope satirizes at those aristocratic ladies who take great pain in order to curl their hair. The lines describing the contents of the bag contain sighs, sobs, passion and flowing tears. The word honor is used not in the sense of a chastity or purity, but in the sense of mere reputation. A woman cares more for the preservation of her reputation than for the preservation of her chastity. In Canto 5, Pope has introduced his mouthpiece Clarissa. She draws the attention of all. Everyone becomes silent. She says that why beautiful women are so greatly admired and honored, why they are the objects of the passion of even wise men, and why boastful young men purpose toast to them, why they embellish themselves with all the garments and ornaments from all parts of the world. Clarissa says that these honors which women receive and try hard to obtain are useless until they are able to retain by their good sense what they win by their beauty. فبعد Clarissa's speech produced no effect وبيفضل الوضع زي ما هو فيه صرخات وصياح وهرر وصرخ. Thalestris with the help of other women attacks at the Baron. بتبدأ بقى ان هم يهاجموا البارون. It's an epic fight in which gods and goddesses are shown. She kills many of the men with angry looks from both her eyes. One of them collapsed with the words in praise of Thalestris' beauty on his lips. Another fellow, a dandy, died like a swan singing a song of love. All of this actually satire. However, their efforts go in vain. Belinda rushes at the Baron and throws a pinch of snuff at a point exactly below his nostrils. He began to sneeze and even the tears also start flowing. Pope writes that only the muse of poetry knows if it has flown. The muse has seen the look ascending to the sky in the shape of a new star with a long line of hair trailing behind it. فهنا تكون الخصلة رجعت مكانها الطبيعي للسماء in which it will be خالدة ومستمرة للأبد وبتضيء للناس. There in the sky the lock of hair would remain forever. The fashionable people would survey it from the mall. The happy lovers would take it to be Venus. Astrologers would see it through his telescope and predict the downfall of Louis of France, or prophesy the fall of Rome. In the end of the poem, the poet suggests or urges Belinda to stop lamenting the loss of the lock of hair. Her lock is now adding a new luster to the bright heavens. She herself will die in course of time, but that particular lock of hair will be immortalized by the muse of poetry as a sacred object. The muse will give to that lock, which is now a constellation, the name of Belinda. So the most important thing to understand from this epic is how is it considered a satire, and how is it considered an epic or a heroic poem. An epic or a heroic poem is one that tells the story of a hero whose exploits have a national significance. It's a long narrative poem written in an eminent style. It's a long narrative poem written in an epic form and served as models for later writers. The epic hero is often a great national figure. In Paradise Lost, Adam is the father of the entire human race. The action of an epic is built on a vast scale. For example, in the Odyssey, it covers the events of the Trojan War and the wanderings of the Odyssey on his way home from the war. Okay, generally, a poet begins an epic with the declaration of the theme and with the invocation either to the heavenly muse or to the muse of poetry to assist him in the task. So the mock epic or the mock heroic epic is a poetic form which uses the epic structure but on a miniature scale على يعني نطاق أضيق أو أصغر and with a subject that is mean or trivial على موضوع trivial هايف. Its purpose is satirical بيكون موضوعها هجائي to make the subject look ridiculous by placing it in a framework entirely inappropriate or entirely not suitable for its importance. The Rape of the Lock is the best known and most brilliant example of the mock heroic epic by Alexander Pope. The central incident of the poem is based on a real incident in which Mr. Bittery cuts off the lock of hair of a beautiful lady اللي هي Arabella Fermor, which resulted in a dispute between two families which have a social, religion, family ties. By placing this incident in such a framework, Pope hoped to show the rape as trivial and so to reconcile the two families. The Rape of the Lock is the masterpiece of the mock heroic because it mocks at the maximum amount of the epic. It's a parody of the epic poem at its form, manner, with invocations, its simile, its frequent use of he said, she said, he replied, use of machinery, its battles, its journeys. We find Belinda flashing lightning from her eyes in order to attain his object. The Baron prays before sunrise. Pope also used supernatural elements like salamanders, nymphs, gnomes, sylphs. The function of the sylphs is to protect the purity and virtue of young maidens. Okay, thus the poem is a parodies of Homer, Virgil, Spencer. Instances of a burlesque treatment in the poem include Belinda's voyage to Hampton Court, which suggests the voyage of Aeneas up the Tiber in Virgil. The coffee party, which is a parody of the meal frequently described in Homer. In Canto 5, Pope has introduced his mouthpiece Clarissa. She draws attention of all. Everyone becomes silent. She says that why beautiful women are so greatly admired and honored. So the mock heroic is generally written to reform society, and therefore satire always remains in the center of the poem. In The Rape of the Lock, we find Pope as a spokesman of his age. It's the expression of artificial life of age and card-playing parties, snuff-taking, and ideal vanities. It's not only a satire on society, it's also a witty parody of the heroic style in poetry. Even the verse form is treated humorously. The satire in the poem in general regarding the Belinda toilet, game of cards, of cutting the lock of hair, Gnome's visit to the cave of spleen, stylishness and emptiness, the meanness of the vanity, jealousies, trickeries and intrigues of social life of the aristocracy of the 18th century. Actually, it's a well representation of the 18th century, and it contains, as we have discussed, several cantos. Every canto has its own progression or a description of the event. Good luck.